Thank you for listening to Dream 10X Radio, where we interview people attempting to live extraordinary lives. Our twofold purpose is to both direct and inspire people bold enough to do the same. Dream 10X. Face your fears and make your life count.
This sailing trip that I did, this sailing trip for me finished 10 years ago now, and that's crazy for me to think about. And I'm 39 years old, and I've done a lot of stuff since that sailing trip. And but this sailing trip still lights people up. People still love to talk about this trip and this experience that I had. And I still enjoy talking to it, and I love the look on people's eyes when they want to hear about it and all that sort of stuff. But it's something that happened for me a long time ago, I guess, which is interesting, and a lot of stuff has happened since. I think a lot of people it lights up their imagination, and they really want to understand how you can go and do those sorts of things, or they really want to understand why. And I guess I love talking about those things, and I'm a really practical person, and I love talking about practical things, like I want to go to do XYZ, and I'm a very practical person, and I think that's what has enabled me to do the things that I've done. So I'm really open to having any type of conversation, whether it's about my sailing trip 10 years ago, whether it's the sailing trip across the South Pacific again the second time 5 years ago, whether it's about building businesses, whether it's about me trying to complete my circumnavigation by driving a Land Rover around the world. And now I'm stuck in Tasmania with my car stuck in South Africa. So there's lots of stuff to talk about. And I don't know, it's hard to try and think about interviewing myself, but.
How can people get in touch with you now? How can people do business with you? What business do you want to pitch?
Yeah. I think I put a lot of effort into my website over the last few months, and I think my website at the moment really has a collection of everything going on in my life. So if you're interested in the stuff that I'm making, interested in my book, the documentary, or my photography or anything like that, I think the website is the central platform for Nick Jaffe, which is nickjaffe.com.au, and then links off to my Instagram. I Instagram quite a lot of stuff, so if people are interested in that. So between my website and Instagram, that's probably got everything going on.
Yeah, cool. I really love how, like I said, you're branding yourself and how organized you are about it.
And you're an artist.
And I'm an artist. I mean, I don't really separate adventure and art. To me, that they're all is one, all one. And to me, art is about originality. It's about creating something. And for me, all of these adventures, they're just that. It's about coming up with an idea, trying to figure out a way to do it, trying to do something original, trying to do something unique, trying to create something. At the end of the day, that's all I do. All I do is create things, whether it's adventures, photographs, films. That's all it is, for me.
Talk a little bit more about adventure as creation. I like that concept. I've never really thought of it like that. What is that? How is it a creation to you?
Yeah, so when I was at art school, I did my fine arts degree in photography, and it sort of morphed. It was a very free and open art school, and I was really interested in photography and also installation art. I was interested in a lot of conceptual art. I was very interested in the German philosopher and artist Joseph Beuys, who talked about life as art, and that very much struck me during this sort of fluxus period, this period of post-war art, post-war Germany, this sort of stuff. He was obviously German, and this idea that art was not just paintings, it was not just sculptures, that your life could be art, and that really struck me. And and I never really spoke about that much in the film. I think maybe I was too young to be able to talk about the things that were influencing me wholly. And I've had so much time now to think about things retrospectively and to try and piece together why I've done things. And I spoke a bit about that in my book, which I published in April. But yeah, I mean, for me, this idea of creation it's what drives me. I every day I wake up and I have a bad day if I don't get an opportunity to make something. And then when I say make something, like I said, that doesn't mean sitting down and drawing or painting. It could be doing a bit of writing, or it could be playing my guitar, or something. Like I feel like we are on this earth to create. And I think for me, coming up with these ideas, like coming up with this idea that I was going to complete my circumnavigation, which I started in my Contessa 26, you know, and that voyage finished 10 years ago. And I decided 2 years ago that I wanted to complete my trip around the world, but I wanted to do the other half of it by Land Rover. So it became this really exciting thing. Like it was like birthing this new adventure. It's like you come up with this very quick concept, like, oh, okay, I'm going to drive around the world. And then you start working backwards from there. You're like, well, how on earth, you know, how do you do that? And what is the interesting idea around that? What's the concept? And for me, it sort of was like, okay, I'm going to finish my circumnavigation of the world, but I'm also going to tie it in. I'm going to drive from the most southern road in Australia to the most northern road in Europe, which is from down here in Tasmania to above the Arctic Circle of Norway. And then I'd start looking at maps of the world, and it's just super exciting. You're looking at a map of the world and you're almost painting a picture of how you're going to get around it, you know. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of how I think about things, I suppose.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So are you familiar with the work of John Dewey?
Yes, I'm familiar with the work of John Dewey, and I have one of his books that I carried on my boat, and I'm just looking at my bookshelf now to try and remember the title of it. But I think it is Art of Life, or The Life of Art, or something along
Art
those
as
lines.
Experience?
But yeah,
Yep, Art as Experience.
Art as Experience.
So
That's it. I'm looking at it right now.
So John Dewey talks about, as you know, how when an artist creates something, they do it for their own aesthetic experience, but also to impact others to have that same aesthetic experience. When you create something, so be it your book or the movie or your art, your pictures, how has aesthetics formulated your own education and perception of the world? And two, how have you thought to impact others in their aesthetic experience?
One of the interesting things I've been thinking about of late is because I've been doing a lot of content creation where you're creating a lot of content for brands, you're creating things that they're wanting. And for me, a lot of the things that I've created have not come from a place of wanting to create them for others, in the sense that there's, for me, it's really, how can I express it? It's on the one hand creating these experiences for myself. I enjoy about that process of creation is proving to myself, and I think in the effect that it has on others, it proves to others that things can be possible. And I think that's a really interesting thing. The thing that I love is being able to prove to myself, and in the process it proves to others,
Right.
that certain things are possible.
I love that topic of adventure as creation, and the topic of sharing those adventures with other people. A lot of people think it's kind of egotistical to do that, but I really appreciate your angle on that. That it's art, it's creation of art, it's sharing the aesthetic of being outside in nature and experiencing. You know, here's what it's like in the middle of the Atlantic or the middle of the Pacific. You know, with these waves.
Yeah. I mean, I never, I mean, you could perceive it as being egotistical, certainly. I always feel like, and I feel like it's hard to look at the film objectively, but I feel like in the film I have been and it's almost egotistical to say this, but I feel like I've been humble. I don't feel like I've ever tried to be a hero or to have any of that type of angle. That's never been my thing.
No,
It's really been, yeah.
I wasn't saying that you were. I was just saying in general that some, some.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand, but it is an interesting point, because I've certainly thought about these things, and I have been very conscious about not wanting to come across as being egotistical or showing a false reality, or that I'm strong or tough or anything. I've always tried to be very truthful, I think.
Yeah, I loved the raw you in that video and in the movie, and what it was like to get seasick and not know what you're doing and all that. It's just that was what's so inspiring, I think, about it is how real it was, I think.
Mm.
Would you mind talking a little bit about the business side of yourself?
Mm.
The techpreneur or whatever?
Yeah. So, like, when I was, I'll try to be quick because it's a long story, but I'll try to compress it a bit. But my tech journey started when I was very young. I was very into tech when I was young, and I didn't like school very much. My parents were teachers. They wouldn't let me leave school. Eventually, I was able to force them into letting me leave school under certain provisions. And one of those was that, oh, sure, Nick, you can leave school, but to get a job in tech, which is what I wanted to do, because I was offered a job when I was 16 in tech.
Wow.
And they said, yeah, sure, you can do that, but you've also got to finish school at the same time. And they thought that they'd stumped me with this problem. But, I solved this problem, and I worked out how to study from home via distance education, a distance education program that was designed for kids who lived in the remote outback areas. I called them up and I said, look, this is my situation. I'm going to go to work. I can't attend school. I need to do distance education. And they're like, okay, cool. So, and I did that, and I finished my, I don't know I can't remember what you call it in the States, but I finished my final years of high school. I finished school like every other kid, and while working full time as a software developer and commuting 4 hours a day because I didn't have a driver's license because I was too young. And, I did that, and I got to the age of, I think, 20 or 21, and I'd been doing photography, and I was interested in art, and I felt I didn't want to be stuck at a desk for the rest of my life. And I could see that technology is engrossing, like you have always got to be pushing.
Mm.
And I felt like I needed something more from my work. And that was when I started putting together my folio, my work, and I got into a really great art school. And I was just so stoked to get into art school. I was 21, and I did my degree. And I very much sort of gave my hopes and dreams up around technology. I was not so interested anymore, but I still had skills, and those skills are what helped me pay for my boat when I was living in Berlin and that sort of stuff. And so I still dabbled in tech, but my heart wasn't in it. And when I finished my voyage in Constellation, I think I was 29, and I got back to Australia, and I was like, Jesus, what am I going to do now? I was really over sailing. I had enough, and I didn't want to get a job. I thought, God, you can't go through that experience and then go walk into a day job. And I spoke to some friends, about what I could do, and my long-term friend Marty, he said, why don't we start a business together? And I was like, okay. So we started working in cloud infrastructure and web hosting in the web hosting industry, and we built a business from scratch. We put I think $2 each into a bank account to start our business bank account, and we built it up over many years, and we did other really cool projects. We built a co-working space. I have an online bike store. I sort of just went nuts. I came back off that sailing boat. I felt like I could do anything. And so worked in business for 6-7 years, and really the building the business stuff. I thought that I might be able to build things to a point where I could regain my freedom again, and I started getting itchy feet. I want to go sailing, adventuring again, and the business stuff. It didn't turn me into some multimillionaire CEO or anything like that. It was very much sort of a lifestyle business, and I got to live how I wanted. I worked remotely. We had a small team that we had, and we all worked how we wanted. We worked our own hours. We concentrated on environmental initiatives. We became a B Corp. We were very consciously building our business around our lives and how we wanted to live, and also how we perceived, how we believe businesses should exist in this world. And it was an exciting time, and we built something really great. But at the end of the day, I had enough of business, and I wanted my freedom back, and I wanted to pursue art, and I wanted to pursue adventure again. So a couple of years ago, I sold my half of the business to my business partner, Marty, and I was out on my own again. And that's where I've been for the last couple of years. But business is still a thing for me, but in a smaller scale. It's just me, and I found it quite stressful having employees, having to look after other people. I found that stressful, and I enjoy how it is now, but there's also pitfalls to being on your own. I run my house as an Airbnb. I have my small leather goods label, and I also do commercial motion and stills work, and I do a lot of different things. So yeah, that's the long answer really to your question.
No, that's so fascinating. There's so much in there too. Did you experience a sense of freedom on the whole, single-handed sailing across two oceans, but not having any money to your name, really?
Yeah. Yeah. The freedom, it's just this very delicate balance in life. It's about your freedom and how you define freedom. A lot of people define freedom in their minds as some type of financial freedom. We live in such a capitalist world where everything seems to revolve around money. Whereas, for me, when I think about freedom, it's the freedom to think my own thoughts. It's the freedom to spend the time that I wish with the people that I wish. It's the freedom to spend my time on my own terms. Those sorts of things. I don't necessarily immediately jump to freedom equals $1 million or anything like that. I'm very conscious of time and the limited amount of time we have. I think about time on a daily basis. I think about how much time I have left, and I'm driven by the ticking clock. I'm not driven by money, although I need money. I'm not an idiot. And so in terms of, did I experience freedom sailing as a 27-year-old on a 26-foot boat with no money crossing oceans? Yes, I experienced a certain type of freedom, and it's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, experiences of my life. But as you grow older and things change and situations change, freedom means different things to different people, and I think it's very important to remember that. Freedom as a white educated male means something very different to somebody else, and I always need to remember who I am, where I am, the luck that I've been given. And so, freedom is a complex thing to discuss. But to ultimately, to answer your question, yes, I felt very free most of the time during that trip.
And then when you came back and started doing the tech business stuff and started making some money for yourself, then how did your definition of freedom compare to being out on the open ocean?
I very much dove into the business stuff, and I loved creating things again. It was a challenge. It's like, these are the parameters, and figure out interesting ways to solve problems. And I loved that. And so I had freedom at that point was I had enough money not to worry about money. I've never been wealthy. If you were to look at how much money I've had relative to a middle class Australian person of my age, I would say I have been quite poor always. But I had enough money to not have to worry about paying rent and things like that. Whereas when I was on the sailing boat, it was, I was very much worrying about money all the time. And so, yeah, building businesses, I didn't have to worry about money so much. But then I had other trade-offs.
Yeah.
I had responsibilities around the business, and as we started to have people helping us in our business, I had responsibilities to them, and I think it pushed a bit too far for me. I think it started building things that were a bit too much for me and took away from my freedom too much, and the money stuff was not enough to compensate for that. So again, it came back down to the balance.
Yeah, thinking about that, that's the maybe think a little bit there about objective. How do you say it? Like freedom is really subjective, definition. That's really interesting.
Yeah, because John Locke has a lot of. I'm looking up John Locke right now because I remembered he has a bunch of things on freedom, and it's very akin to the things that you're saying, where it's subjective and there's a lot of forbearance and willingness to figure out your own way. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think really I think people, if they are listening to this or they're thinking about their own freedom, I think it's important to fight for freedom, whatever that looks like. But I think a lot of people forget. It's so easy to forget the importance of freedom and for people to equate simplistic meanings of freedom. For example, financial freedom.
Yeah.
Financial freedom is the only type of freedom. That's not true.
Yeah.
Right. That might mean something to you deep in your heart, and that's okay, and that's great if that's what freedom really means to you. But I don't think, as a general rule, I think it's important that people think about freedom more. I think it's a really important thing to think about. I think thinking about freedom is as important as thinking about love, or other, really base things.
Wow. Yeah, I think about, so I'm the guy who thinks about shallow financial freedom constantly.
And I'm the opposite. I think of freedom more like you.
That's good. It's
family and
the perfect match then.
Yeah, exactly. We balance each other.
That's interesting. As I've grown up, so I grew up in a very Christian family as a kid, in the Christian church. Money is the root of all evil kind of thing, and so I've always been like, well, money's bad. But then as I got older, I started coming to the realization that I got to have money, and I got to have a lot of it if I want to realize my true self and be really free as I see it. But I totally see your point that you do need, it's a much deeper and broader word than to many different people. There's political freedom, and I'm not in jail, so I have all kinds of different ways of looking at it. That's for sure.
And it seems to be like freedom would be like a theory of action. So it's, you earn your freedom, whatever that means to you, by doing something versus letting things happen to you.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and that is this idea. A friend of mine was visited me a few months ago, and she was enraptured by the huge bull kelp in the ocean near my house, and she became obsessed with looking at this bull kelp, and I was like, what's this thing going on with the bull kelp? And she's just like, she's like. And this connected with her life at that time, just this idea of being this piece of kelp in the ocean, and the ocean is just washing you around. You're at complete mercy of the ocean. And that, I think, is for many people what the real core issue of one of the core issues of unhappiness in life is being that bull kelp and not having this sense of control over your own path. And again, I think that comes back down to freedom. You have a sense of freedom if you have more control over your own existence, however that might look. So, yeah, for sure.
In your movie Between Home, you had an interesting reflection on sailing solo and how some of the experiences you wish you could really share with somebody. but how difficult it would have been for you to convince a friend or somebody to spend 2 to 3 months with you. Um, you know, nobody could figure out a way to pull themselves away from what they're doing in life or society to do what you've done. And that really struck me.
Mm.
Like, so that kind of segues with freedom. Uh, how were you able to, why were you able to do that and other people aren't? Well, what do you think those chains are? And are they
I
purely
think
mental or financial or?
mm, they're definitely not financial. For me, you know, for me, it's very simple. It's very simple because it's simply a choice. It's like, this is what I'm going to do at the cost of everything else. That's it.
Yeah.
And I was in a position at my life at that time where I could do that. I didn't have kids. I was not married. I didn't have a mortgage. I was pretty good with my money. I didn't have credit card debts. I had positioned myself where I could concentrate, put my full focus onto this one thing and dedicate every ounce of my energy to that thing. And I recall very distinctly, at the end of that trip, the immense relief that I had because I had not stopped concentrating and thinking about that expedition for 4 years. Everything in my life revolved around that, and that revolved around personal relationships. Losing personal relationships because they just wouldn't fit into the narrative that I developed. They wouldn't fit into the inertia that I created on that voyage, and so
Hmm.
I think the issue is that a lot of people potentially haven't positioned themselves in their lives to be able to concentrate at that level, or B, they really just like the idea of sailing around the world, and when they actually start to think about it, they realize that in many ways it's pretty shit. It's pretty hard, right? And you have to give up a lot. You've got
Yeah.
to give up a lot to do that. You have to give up everything to do that. And I don't think
Huh.
people really, or many people really want to do that. And they are blocked from really doing it, and they get distracted. All of it, they have this big dream, and all of a sudden, then they get distracted by all the small details, and they're suddenly derailed, and that's the end of it.
Hmm.
But I just really don't think that there was nothing particularly special. I didn't have some huge inheritance that suddenly allowed me to buy a boat and sail off around the world. It was nothing like that. It was about making the decision about that. That's what I wanted to dedicate my time to,
Hmm.
and I did. And I dedicated all of my time and energy to that for 4 years. And 4 years is a pretty big chunk out of an adult's life. And I just don't think many people are prepared to do that. I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah. That's really
Mm.
interesting. And also interesting was the fact that, yeah, you hardly had any money then. How old were you? You were like 18 years old?
No, no, no. I was when I bought the Constellation, I was 26.
Oh, 26.
I was living in Berlin at the time. Yeah.
Okay. But so you had let's go back a little bit. So you went to Berlin initially because you wanted to find out more about your dad, right?
Yeah, so I went to Berlin when I finished art school for two reasons. I went because I had an interest in German art, and I had an interest in Joseph Beuys. I had an interest in some of the photographers coming out of the Dusseldorf area, and I also wanted to see if I could find some more information about my biological father. Maybe there was some distant relative I could connect with, and that's why I moved to Berlin. And I had a German passport, so I was very lucky in that sense. And so I really went to Berlin to find out more about my personal history, and I also wanted to study at master's level. And I soon realized that my German was never going to be good enough to do that. And then I ended up hitchhiking and got up to the Arctic Circle and did all this other stuff, and then eventually bought the boat, and then that whole thing started. So that's why I was in Berlin.
Okay. So I was just a little bit curious how that whole adventure took place there. So it wasn't clear to me like what happened in your mind to spark that whole thing. Like, but you did have a really cool line where you said you needed to so you were headed back to Australia, you knew that, and you had the choice to either take a 12-hour flight or a multi-year adventure to see the entire world in between those 2 points. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah,
But what?
yeah, and I mean,
Go ahead.
the sailing thing was not totally random.
Okay.
You know, I had, you know, I grew up doing a lot of adventurous stuff with my dad. My was technically my second dad, but he's just my dad since I was, you know, 2.5 years old. And he's a really amazing guy, and we did all sorts of stuff. My whole childhood, we were doing cool stuff. Okay, we weren't sailing, that's true. But you know, Jesse Martin, the youngest solo circumnavigator, he was from Melbourne. And I remember reading his book at the age of 18. Jesse and I are friends, and we're the same age. And so I'd been inspired by Jesse at that time, and it was in my consciousness. And I had done some sailing in Melbourne. I was very bored with sailing because everybody wanted to sail around buoys, and I wanted to like go off and cross an ocean. And so it wasn't totally random. It was in my consciousness, and it was just that things didn't totally line up until I was in Berlin, and I had this sense of freedom. I felt that I was not around people telling me I couldn't do things. If I was in Melbourne and I said, oh, I'm going to buy a sailing boat and sail around the world, I would have had 50 people tell me what an idiot you are. But if you're in a brand new city and you don't know anybody, and you tell people you're going to sail around the world, they're like, cool. And so, you know, I think that's a really interesting thing as well. But you know, the idea that I was going to sail home, and that I think was a very conceptual thing, where you're thinking about, okay, well, there's these 2 points on the earth, and it's like, gee, I wonder what's in between those 2 points. I mean, that's a really cool thing to think about. And
Right.
when people are like, oh, you know, why would you sail around the world? That's, for me, it's like, God, why wouldn't you? Haven't you ever sat in your bed at night or looked out the window and just wondered what it would be like to just off into the horizon? And I mean, the only difference is that I did it. And so, yeah, I mean, it's simple in many ways, I think.
Can you point to any specific catalyst that started that whole project for you? Did you go to Berlin knowing that you would probably take that way home?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
I went to Berlin with an idea that I was going to be an artist, and I was going to studying, you know, a very different track. And actually, the reality, the truth is that I'd been working in Melbourne before, and I'd saved up some money. I think I had $8,000 that I had saved up. That was my Berlin fund, and so I rocked up in Berlin with a bit of a runway to support myself for a while until I figured out what the hell I was doing. And it was actually one day that I was sitting online, and I realized I could buy like a cabin in Sweden. And I thought, that sounds amazing. I think I'm going to go move to Sweden. I'm going to go live in a cabin. Like, I just had this like Thoreau type dream. I was like, well, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? If I can buy a cabin in Sweden for $7,000, I mean, I'm going to go do that. And I had this I mean, all of the stuff I think about, it's always very romantic. I was like, oh, I'm going to go to Sweden. I'm going to live in this cabin. I'm going to get myself a dog, and I'm going to be like reading by candlelight and snuggling up with the dog, and, you know, all of this sort of Jack London type stuff in my head. And I went up to Sweden to buy the cabin, and then the cabin fell through. And I was like, oh, well, I'm in Sweden. I was in Stockholm. So I started hitchhiking. I thought, you know what? I wonder what the Northern Lights look like, because it was as simple as that. And I thought, I wonder what it's like to be, you know, I wonder what it's like to be in an environment where there's light. Sorry, not the Northern Lights. What is it? It was in summer. What is it like to be in a place where there's light 24 hours a day? I thought, oh, well, I'll hitchhike up to the Arctic Circle and see. And so that's what I did. And then I was up in the Arctic Circle in the Lofoten Islands, and I was looking out at the sea, and I was like thinking to myself, I was thinking about Jesse Martin, I was thinking about sailing. And initially I thought, I'm going to come back, I'm going to sail through the fjords of Norway. And then it just expanded. The idea just blew up. It was like, oh, well, if I'm going to sail to Norway, I might as well sail to the Caribbean. And I was like, if I'm going to sail to the Caribbean, I might as well sail to the South Pacific. I'm going to sail to the South Pacific. Well, you know, Australia is right next door. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how it came about.
Love that. That is really cool.
That is
Love the
like
progression.
the best representation of turning thought into action. Like so many people are paralyzed by that. They would have these really cool ideas and dreams, but then talk themselves out of it instead of being like, well, we're here, why not? Let's move forward. And so, I mean, it's really, really amazing that you're immediately able to adapt and move forward versus being paralyzed by fear about moving forward. So yeah, turning thoughts into actions, that's really powerful.
So are you crazy? Like, how do you turn such a big dream into action without rationalizing yourself out of that?
Well,
Is that a dumb
I
question?
mean,
Not at all.
I mean, I don't think I'm crazy. I think everybody else is crazy.
I concur.
I just, someone sent me a message the other day, and they were reading my book, and they said, Nick, I don't understand how you've had so many different lives.
Yeah.
And I thought about that, and I thought, well, why is that? Like, why do I keep doing stuff? And why, I don't think it's out of a craziness. I think I just love to have an intense life. Like everything in my life is intense. I just love to experience things. And I'm driven by that. I'm driven to want to experience as much as I possibly can. I've worried now. I'm 39. I turned 40 next year, and I've worried in my 20s and my 30s. I thought, shit, I hope I don't become like a normal person and buy a house in the suburbs. I really worried about that. I hope I don't, get a job and lose all my dreams. And now that I'm getting older, I'm starting to have confidence in myself. It sounds crazy, but I'm starting to be like, oh, wow, okay. You know what? People starting to take me seriously now. I'm like turning 40 and I'm still doing these ridiculous things. That's pretty cool. And so I'm starting to have a bit more confidence in myself. And maybe in my early years, maybe I did think I was a bit crazy. I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'm crazy, but it's possible. I mean,
That was a rhetorical question. I don't think you're crazy at all. I know a lot of people, would think that. And
So
say
James
that
and
to
I
us.
tried to row the North Atlantic in 2016, and we got our friends were obviously and family were great supporters, but a lot of like the public were not so much. And so it's
Almost to the point. There's a lot of anger out there
yes.
for people
And we
pursuing
were just
dreams.
trying to do something amazing. So it's interesting, like the people, like their perception of you and how they wouldn't do it themselves, and so they perceive you as being crazy. So
Yeah, and I think, if you guys had already rowed across a couple of oceans before, or you'd like climbed Everest, or done one of those things, I think the perception from the public would probably be different, But
Yeah.
when you go off and that's
Right.
maybe your first significant thing, So I got some flack, for I was always late in the season. You asked why I was late in Biscay. It was just logistics, and people will tell you you're crazy, and maybe in some respects to do things is a bit crazy. But I also really believe when people come to me, and I always get a lot of young men emailing me, and they're like, they want to know how to do something. They want to know how to sail off around the world, and they say, I don't know how to do it. I don't have an experience. And I never write back to them. I never write back to them and say, hey, look, I don't think it's a good idea. If you haven't done anything before, I just don't think so. I always support what people want to do. If that's what they want to do, I think, and it's not harming others, I think, people should be given the freedom to do that and the encouragement to do that. And if they make a mistake and they make a mistake, or they have bad luck, that's unfortunate, but that's reality. And if you want to go do these things, then you have to accept the risks. It's as simple as that. It's just, and if you can't come to terms with that, you probably shouldn't do it.
Be willing to pay
so yeah, it seems a lot of times people do want that somebody to tell them it's okay. Like somebody trying to tell me it's okay that I can do this forward, and getting that reassurance.
Yeah, you got to find it in yourself.
Yeah. So I love that you've taken that mentor role now and really kind of switched. So you're still doing your own adventures, but you're able to mentor others into their own being. So that's really powerful too.
How insurmountable was that whole project for you? Or was it or was it at all? Do you just break things down into their individual components and just when you set your mind to do it, you just do it? Or did you think about how big the whole thing was?
I remember, I remember in the documentary, I actually can't remember. It's been a long time since I watched the documentary. I can't actually remember if it's in there, but I remember at some point, Jack, the filmmaker, asked me how long it was going to take me to sail home. And I was like, oh, it'd probably take me 9 months. And I just, so it's, I broke it down, and everything was a step for me, like people like, oh, how did you suddenly cross the Atlantic on your own? And was like, well, I didn't suddenly cross the Atlantic on my own. I was a whole range of steps. It was like, first I started sailing by day, then I started sailing at night, then I did my first night passage, then I did a 2-night passage, then I did a 3, then I did a 10, then I did a 30. So I broke it down, and I couldn't think about all of the details. I mean, your head would explode if you tried to calculate everything and work out everything and be like, well, how much money do I need? What's my budget? How long is it going to take me? And some people do that, and I appreciate that method of doing it. But for me, it's like being an adventurer is like being a painter, like you're just like painting as you go. And so for me, it was just breaking it down and continuing, and with each leg and with each section of the voyage, and it gave me confidence, and I think it showed other people that I had skin in the game and that I was making things happen, and I think that's why I also experienced a lot of generosity on the trip, because people could see that I'd given up everything for this, and I had a lot of skin in the game. I took a lot of risk, but I kept pushing forward and I kept being successful. And I think that's important to remember as well, the inertia that you generate, but also that the inertia that happens around you when people see what you're doing and they see that you're actually succeeding in it. And that's when the crazy person turns into the adventurer, I think.
Yeah. Wow. I love your advice there about taking small steps. I think we made a lot of mistakes in that regard.
Yeah, we did.
But I totally, I feel that in my heart, how true that is. I have that experience as well. How did you arrive at purchasing a Contessa 26 as your blue water vessel? Did you have a good knowledge of what a good blue water boat was at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think because I spent so much of my time on the internet, I spent so much time as a developer. I was extremely good at researching. I was extremely good at finding out answers to questions, and I was extremely good at asking questions. And that has been a real thing that I've never been fearful of. I've never been afraid to ask questions. I don't give a shit what people think about me, but I will do my utmost best to ask really good questions.
So curiosity and asking for help is key.
And being very also conscious about the questions that I'm going to ask. Like I would never ask someone, oh, hey, what boat should I buy? Because it shows that you haven't invested any of your own energy into it. Right. It's a bit like there's that idea that should you pick up a hitchhiker who's not trying to walk to their destination? Should you And so I was always walking towards my destination. I was just asking for people for some help along the way. So my questions, I spent a lot of time on forums and stuff as well, talking to people and asking good questions. And I was able to hone in on boats. I was like the Island Packet 27, the Sabre 28, Vancouver 27, SNS 32, the boat that Jesse Martin had. I did my research, and I researched what other successful young sailors had done long voyages in. I mean, I was not going to the moon, right? Other people had done what I'd done. So why would I waste all of my time trying to do it in some piece of shit boat that nobody's ever done it in? Because I think it's a great idea, or I can get it cheaply, or some other excuse. Why would I not follow in the work of the people who had already achieved things? And I remember Brian Caldwell, I remember Tanya Abbey, I remember reading their books, researching them, I remember researching the boat and understanding the pluses and minuses. And it also was geographic. I was in Berlin. England's just around the corner, and that's where the Contessa comes from. And so it was also quite practical. There were Contessas available. and there weren't SNS 32s. I couldn't afford SNS 32 as much as I would have liked to. And the other designs, I think, from memory, the Island Packet and things that, you know, they were more US centric boats. And so yeah, it was what other people had achieved things in and what was available to me. Very practical methodology for choosing the boat.
Hmm.
You know,
What kind of boat was Harmony?
Harmony was an Aries 32. And as I sailed in my Contessa, I learned more and more about boats, and I was always very happy with my choice of boat. I always appreciated Constellation so much. She was such a beautiful boat. I think she's beautiful lines and very seaworthy, very trustworthy, and a cult-like community around the boat, which was also very important to my success. I think was being able to connect with other Contessa owners and for there to be a real love and cult status of this boat. And the Aries 32, yeah, is a 32-foot double ender. A beautiful boat, lots of teak on the inside, and I really loved the double-ended design. I loved long keel boats. You know, I mean, they're slow, and you know all these other stuff that people go on about, but they're beautiful. I love traditional things. I love the visceral sort of nature of things, and Harmony appeared on a dock when I was in Sausalito, and I looked at it, and she was for sale. I never thought twice about it. And 6 months later, I'd sailed across the South Pacific and sold Constellation. And at the time, the dollar was on parity with the US. And I was able to take the money out of Constellation and pretty much buy Harmony, who sat on the hard for a few years before I could do that trip across the South Pacific.
Wow. My dad always said to me that there are two times, well, it's a common saying, right? Like the two times that the boat, you love your boat the most, when you buy it, when you sell it. Did you ever find that true?
Honestly, I would give anything to have my Contessa back. I would give
Really?
anything to have just to have Constellation back. But I understand that, and for me, I couldn't afford to just have these boats sitting around, and I didn't want to. I hate owning things if they're not getting fully used to their maximum for their purpose.
Right.
And so, just having a sailing boat sitting around on a mooring so that I can go out and eat cucumber sandwiches and drink gin on the weekends or whatever, it's just not my thing. And so I couldn't justify it. But I would love, just for my own personal reasons, I would love to have Constellation back for sure. But you know, I was really happy when I sold her, and I was really happy when I sold Harmony as well. And but you know, yeah, owning a boat's it's a commitment. It's a real commitment.
Yeah.
So, and if you're not using it every day, you're not sailing across an ocean. For me, that's why I had it. I didn't have it because I loved sailing per se, and I loved boats. I loved fixing engines. I sailed it because it had a purpose, you know. And yeah.
So I have a question. And okay, so you sailed, you were by yourself, experiencing nature. You went down the Gordon River on your outboard, just away from society, away from civilization, away from lights, away from noise, away from all these things. How did you experience the world differently, especially coming back into society from like a sensory-based perspective?
You know, I love being in nature, and I'm so fortunate. You know, I'm sitting in my house right now and I'm completely surrounded by trees, and I'm looking at the ocean, and I'm just so fortunate in so many ways. And nature for me, it just I couldn't go live back in a city again. And I think when I came back from that voyage, the thing that hit me most was how in nature I would feel that I'm connected with a true reality, and how when I am living in a city surrounded by people doing bullshit things, how I was not living in a true reality. I was living in a fabrication, and there were a lot of things, a lot of pressures put on me from external things that were not real. And I have I think my patience for the bullshit of daily life very much diminished after that sailing trip. I mean, I already had pretty low levels of patience for the bullshit of daily life, but when I finished that trip, they were next level. I just couldn't put up with it, and it still sits with me. I can't put up with inane conversations. I can't put up with pointless work. I just don't have the capacity for things that aren't true and real. And that's, I think, the real thing that was heightened after I came off that sailing boat. And it's a blessing and a curse, because you have to, unless you want to become a hermit, and live that way, which I don't, you're really going to have to figure out a way to function in the world. And so it's just, again, about balance for me. And I'm pretty happy with where I am at the moment with all of that.
So that segues to my questions on your personal relationships. Are you married now? Girlfriend?
No, no,
No.
no, I'm not married. No, I'm not philosophically against marriage. I've had girlfriends and all that sort of stuff. It's been very hard when I set off on my Land Rover expedition. I isolated myself again, and coming back to Tasmania, I've isolated myself again. And I spoke to a friend recently about this idea that Corona, it sort of highlights all of the decisions that you've made in your life in a way that however you're living at this moment is a culmination of everything you've decided in your life. And on the whole, I'm super happy about the decisions that I've made and where I am right now. I'm in one of the safest, best places in the world, and I'm living in this beautiful place and all that sort of stuff. But certainly personal relationships have been on my mind, particularly in a time like this where you don't want to be alone. You don't want to be experiencing what's going on in the world alone. And I'm very well equipped, and I'm very to manage it on my own. It's not like I'm sitting around crying and I'm scared that I'm on my own. I mean, I'm like got a PhD in being alone, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't like to be close with someone, particularly at this time. And it's certainly, as I'm getting older, it's definitely more on my radar. So let's see.
Okay. I wanted to ask you more about the woman you met in Hawaii, but it's up to you. No, I was just curious.
Yeah, well, we never got married. It was a pretty crazy time, and she was a very driven woman, and she had a lot of her personal ambitions, and she was American, and there was just a lot of differences. I think. Yeah, she just, I think, we had very differences of how we wanted to live our lives. I think in many ways at the crux of it. I think so.
Yeah.
I just have one more quick question for you. If you were to recommend a book, it could be on anything, what would it be?
I think The Revolution of Daily Life, I think it's called, by I can't even remember how to pronounce his name, Roel Vanneguim, who is a Belgian, I don't even know what you'd call him, Belgian philosopher. He wrote a book which is titled, I think in the original French, it was sort of like Lessons for a Young Person or something like that. But he talks a lot about how not to be a slave to externalities, and that I think is an important philosophy. So,
wow.
Yeah, I mean, that book, The Revolution of Daily Life, I mean, Jack Kerouac and all that stuff influenced me a lot, the Beat Generation in my 20s, and definitely be connected with my desire to go off and do sorts of stuff. So I don't know, I could go on. I have so many books, but yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, guys.
It's been a real pleasure after so many years of kind of just reading about you online, watching your videos and whatever. It's good to finally talk to you in person. I really appreciate you taking the
Yeah,
time to talk to us.
no worries, guys. Thanks so much for reaching out, and thanks for having some interesting questions and an interesting conversation. I really appreciate it.